Hi, I'm Alexis Flack, a nature artist and an educator, and thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me today so that I could share a bit about the Guardians art show that Shana Kestrel and I created and that's been on display at Nashville North Studios in Linwood, New Jersey. As a nature artist, I often print and paint. So something I print a lot of is cross sections of trees after they come down. Like this is an ash tree that came down because of insect damage. So I take a print of a tree and then I turn it into a painting that might be telling a story or sharing an idea. One of the ideas and one of the stories that popped up for me again and again is trees as guardians. You know, guardians as elements of nature, pieces of us as guardians, concepts like time and confidence and love, and guarding those things and being guardians of them. So I'd love to show you how I go about printing a tree, and then how I went through the process of creating some of these artworks over the past year as Shana and I worked together to develop this idea. So again, thanks so much for joining me, and I'm really excited to be able to share this with you. When I'm printing the cross-section of a tree like this one, which is a piece of pine that I used to make a print in the journal that I kept throughout the making of this Guardian show, I use acrylic paint, and you can see that in the background, black acrylic paint in this instance. And then I use a foam roller, and I just really smoothly and carefully roll it onto the cross-section of the tree to make sure that I have pretty good coverage. And then I flip it over and press it down, paint side down, onto the paper or whatever surface I'm printing on. And then I turn it over. This sometimes does not go well, and I drop it, and I have to start over. But in this case, it's going well. So I want to press really carefully all around to the edges of the tree cross section so that I get a really nice, crisp, clear print. And I love the tactile experience of doing this because my fingers run over the growth rings of the tree. And then when I peel it up, I have an exact print of the tree. As a nature artist, whenever I step outside, I immediately start looking around to see what's happening in nature. And I get ideas from it to create pieces of art. So it might be something as simple as, one of these hydrangea flowers. I love dried flowers and how they can be used in art. Or it could be something like a shape, such as this echinacea. The center of it, even though the pink petals are long gone, the shape of it with this burst that kind of looks like the energy of a flower. I love that. So I'm always looking for ideas, and then I turn them into stories or images. It's those stories and images that I see in nature that help me create my guardian pieces for this show, and this journal contains some of my creative process for that. So in this journal, I have all kinds of notes like this one with gardens as places to celebrate, grieve, rest, gather, heal, and just breathe. I have examples of kind of the process I went through as I created things. Like you can see there how I was learning to embroider and make French knots on my watercolors. I have questions that I was asking, like Persephone and her garden. So this is one of the pieces in the Guardian show that I named Persephone's Garden, and it has a lot of different layers in it, so I'd love to show you each of those layers. So this began with an idea of flowers, so a daffodil that I pressed, and a lily of the valley that I pressed, and also a lavender that I pressed from my garden, from friends' gardens. And these flowers all, mean different things to me. They're flowers that are loved by some of the women in my family, so I tried watercoloring them. And then I embroidered my watercolors like this daffodil, and then I had to cut each of them out. And I used these special textured scissors that create this kind of like uneven edge to them, which I liked. And then I laid them out with the dried flowers, with the embroidered and watercolored flowers here, with some tree prints, just getting my ideas together. This is my cat Jinx, who pops up in a lot of my work. She's very curious. So once I had those ideas together and I printed the cross sections of the tree using black acrylic like I showed you before, I went in with green watercolor like you can see here, because green and blue, like in this little strip that I cut off at another time from the whole painting, were the two colors I really wanted to go for. You can see the green kind of growing up like growth in the spring, and then blue there, the cyanotype coming down like frost. And I went around and around turning it this way and that way while I was making this piece. Did I want the green from the top or the bottom? And that's a lot of what making art is for me. I try something and then I move it around until I decide. So I decided to stick with green growing up like you can see here. And then I placed each of the samples of the embroidered and watercolored flowers onto it. So lily of the valley, lavender, and daffodil. And then I started doing cyanotype. Cyanotype is an old photography method that uses UV light sensitive fluid and items placed atop it to create prints. So if you look at this image in the top left hand corner of it, I've painted that fluid onto paper, and then I've placed pressed flowers and some crochet made by my great-grandmother onto it to then block the light. So here's an example of that happening. So I already did this in this instance, but you can see how where the flowers were, the sun didn't touch the UV light sensitive fluid. So if you go back to this kind of little explanatory image here, after the sun has touched the paper with the fluid on it, you can see it has printed the flowers. And then you expose it to water to stop this process. So here is Persephone's garden, and you can see the hydrangea flowers on the blue cyanotype after I exposed it to the sun. And I had to then put it in water, which made me pretty nervous. But it worked out okay, and you can see this was the next step where I had one of each flower, a lily of the valley, a lavender, and a daffodil. And then I had to decide, did I want to stay there or add more flowers? And I decided I wanted to add more flowers. I wanted 1 daffodil, 2 lily of the valley, and 3 lavender, which meant that I then had to make a whole lot more French knots. And I must confess, I learned to do that watching YouTube. And I had to watch the video for every single French knot. But it was really fun learning how to do something new. That's part of what art is to me. It teaches my brain to try new things. So once all of my flowers were made, you can see them here and embroidered. I placed them atop the cyanotype and tree print piece. And then I used some special affixative, some glue, to glue all of the flowers down onto the surface, and then I pressed it flat. This piece really means a lot to me as part of the Guardian show because I see Persephone, a figure from ancient Greek mythology, a goddess of spring but also of death, as a guardian who would have a garden, that could be a place where you would be welcome to sit and celebrate, to heal, to mourn, to laugh. And I think, all of us could use a place like that. So you are always welcome in Persephone's garden. Another piece of nature associated with Persephone is a pomegranate, but I wanted to do a retelling of that story for this next piece that I called Love. And you can see in my handwriting there, it says, "Love is made of seeds we plant that can grow if tended, and thus it's full of pomegranates and choices." This is one of many tree print pomegranates that I created in kind of the whole process of the Guardian show as Shana and I were working on different aspects of it. And this is the pine tree that I rolled a blend of pinks, a couple shades of pink, a little bit of purple, a little bit of metallic, all onto this after I blended them, and then I printed it onto the paper and I peeled it up. And then after that I went in with watercolors and added then the different layers of pinks and reds in there, trying to call to mind the center of a pomegranate. I've learned that I cannot try and print in multiple colors. It doesn't work. I just kind of get a smudge, which is not really what I'm going for. So I go in afterwards with watercolors, and then I added, the shapes of the pomegranate fruit, like where the blossom would have been prior to the fruit growing, and then where the fruit would have been attached to the plant itself. And then I used a pair of textured scissors to cut around the edges so that it had a little bit of layering when I placed it on top of the cyanotype and the green pattern of the piece itself. I really had a lot of fun making these pomegranates. There's something about the shape of them that I find really appealing, and I love the idea that a tree and a pomegranate that both, have circles inside them and show growth could be combined in this case to make this little shape. So what can you see in a tree? So in this piece, I was thinking of the poem, the line in the poem by E. Cummings that says, "I carry your heart, I carry it in my heart." And that is because the center of a tree is called the heartwood, and I really thought that would resonate for a piece called Love. Once I had my pomegranates, I worked on creating this green growth, just like in Persephone's garden, and I had a lot of fun using watered down acrylic and a straw here. And then I went in, similarly added, you can see the hydrangeas on top of the cyanotype. I had to soak this one as well. I was less nervous this time since the one for Persephone's garden worked out okay. And then after I let it dry for a while, I put the pomegranate on top of the blue and the green. And the way the colors came together just really made me so happy to see how bright and vivid they were. So there's a bit of love for you. This next piece in the Guardian show, I named it Confidence. And it brings together a variety of ideas of interacting with different people, of different shapes, and so I'd love to share those ideas with you. So this is one of my very favorite tree cross sections that I have printed in many patterns, many paintings, and I love it partially because I don't actually know what type of tree it is. I usually am able to keep track, like if it's a pine tree or an oak tree, an ash, because I can see the tree and pieces of it, but this was so damaged and rotted out that I wasn't able to figure that out, and I love the mystery of that. I also just love the shape of this, and that there's this space in here where a garden could grow or a figure could stand, or I could even turn it this way and it looks like a jellyfish. So, imagination is a wonderful gift that we humans have, and it's something that I really enjoy playing with, the shapes that I see in a tree. Once I decided to use this tree cross-section for this piece, I used white and I printed it on a piece of blue painting that Shana actually created, this blue underpainting. And I usually print this tree this way, but this time I tipped it because Shana said, that really looks like a ship. And I thought, you are right, it does. And then I thought to myself, well, who's going to be paddling or steering or sailing this ship? And I needed to figure that out. So I knew I needed a figure, and as luck would have it, I attended a figure drawing class at Union Hall Arts in Atlantic City, and I did a sketch there that I transformed into this model of a figure, and I paired it with the print, the tree print of the ship, and I added an oar. And so as I worked with this, I started thinking, was the figure paddling through stars, on a river of stars? That didn't quite capture what I was looking for, so I decided I recreated it one more time, and I wanted her to be made from galaxies. I loved that idea, so I used this painting technique to just create my interpretation of a figure formed from galaxies themselves. And then you can see here the final version of the figure, the original sketch that I created, the print of the tree. And then I went in with a really fine point just to add a few detail lines to the figure's body to really capture that idea. This Guardian of Confidence has a lot of personal significance for me because figure drawing is pretty far outside my creative comfort zone, but this figure, with how she's created from galaxies and she steers her ship into the unknown, and she's unafraid and she's ready for whatever happens, it felt like she kept saying to me, just do this thing you don't usually do in your art, and if you feel unsteady, like, I'm here with you, I'm standing with you, I got you. So if you ever feel like having a Guardian of Confidence would be helpful, she's here to stand with you too. This next painting is called Dreams, and it comes from an experience I had with insomnia where I really had trouble sleeping for several months, and also from having really interesting, odd dreams as a kid and sometimes nightmares. So I wanted to create dream guardians to share about that. So in my journal for Guardians, as I was working on this, I wrote, from the night sky above, 7 stars fell to earth and became dream guardians. And then I had to decide what colors to use in the background, and I really love the way the gold and the black, I created kind of a cross-hatching of it. I also, did some more thinking about which tree cross sections to use. So this first one is pine, and you can see the way the different tree rings are forming on these different pieces. I wanted a variety. I really liked that a lot. So I wanted to make sure that I had different spacings, different amounts of rings. This one in the middle right here is mulberry. And then I was back to pine again with this one. And I also wanted them to be different sizes. I didn't want 7 identically formed cross sections of trees. And these two are both pine, but they have very different rings, different shapes. This next one is also a pine tree. And I wanted to figure out a way to use these as the heads of the figures and position them in such a way that they looked like they were talking to each other. So after I printed the 7 cross sections using white acrylic, I paused on the painting for a little while and just thought about it, looked at it, thought about it, looked at it, and then I started drawing the figures. And I wanted to cluster them so that they were chatting in small groups. I don't really know what they're chatting about, and I don't think that's up to me to decide. It's whatever you see or you think. And I think that's part of what art can be, what anyone's brain sees, what it creates meaning for them. So after I was pretty set on the figures, I used that same splatter approach to create the stars in the sky above them and in their bodies, because they are stars. Someone, after she saw this painting, said something about it that just really struck a chord in me. And she said, I wish I could hang this painting of these dream guardians right near my bed so that they were looking after me when I sleep. And I really loved that idea and appreciated that so much. And I also really love the idea of these dream guardians standing with you as you go chase down the dreams you have for yourself in your wonderful and precious life. So if you ever need a dream guardian, whether you're asleep or awake, these 7 stars that fell down from the sky, they're here to be with you. The last aspect of Guardians artwork that I'd like to share with you is this concept of a winter solstice quilt. And I created 8 cyanotypes as part of this, and I was really inspired by frost. This was frost on the thyme right outside my door pretty recently because of that cool crispness of it. It's a bright and also chilly day today in December, and thinking about the quilt concept that Shana and I developed actually sometime last summer, we really started talking about a quilt with the pieces she was creating and the pieces I was creating using cyanotypes and prints of different trees and flowers and figure drawings and animals. I then went and grabbed these, which are quilt squares that my grandmother made years and years and years ago, before I was born, long before I was born. And obviously, I have a thing for blue that I think I maybe come by, honestly. And I really looked at how she did this, with the squares and the different patterns, and thinking about quilts and how that keeps you warm. And quilts are places to hold memories and tell stories and things that something that could bring a group of people together as they combine their ideas. So my ideas for this quilt are in the form of cyanotypes and of the lot of blue, and it all goes back to joining the squares and ideas together. So I named this cyanotype Hope because of the hummingbirds that sometimes visit the perennial hibiscus that you can see there that's almost transparent, and this is what's available in the winter of these hibiscus and behind my home. And then the hummingbirds zip up off into the sky, and I always find it so hopeful whenever I watch them zipping around the garden. I also knew I wanted to include a butterfly piece in the quilt with the cyanotypes I made in July and August, because of butterflies like this one that landed on my fingertips in Sister Jean's community garden in Atlantic City with crops this past summer. I have never had an experience like this before, and it was incredible to have something so strong and so delicate land on my fingers, and I knew that I just had to have a butterfly piece be part of this quilt. And you can see here how I drew a sketch of the butterfly and then paired it with some Queen Anne's lace, a daffodil, the blue cornflower, and then you can see the cyanotype fluid before the sun hit it behind all of that. And even though a butterfly would not visit a daffodil, that's not the way the wheel of the year works with butterflies and daffodils. I really wanted to pair them together and just show the strength and resilience of a butterfly. This piece, Wonder, is one that I really had a lot of fun making as I incorporated figure drawings into it. So these are some figure sketches that I did at Union Hall Arts in Atlantic City at one of their classes. And that last one right there, I transformed into this figure that's just an outline. And then I used a star hole punch to create the star forms in the figure's body. And I wanted to use a black Sharpie marker because that would block the sunlight when I placed it on top of the blue cyanotype. And so I wanted it to have these shades of blue and stars and flowers to capture the idea of being adrift in nature and wondering about it, you know, as you look up at the sky and the stars that are up there, because I'm so inspired by the stars in the sky and the idea of just taking a moment and absorbing the beauty of nature that's all around us and guarding it. This last cyanotype I named Memories, and I included flowers and shapes from my own memories in it. So one of those is using these doilies that my great-grandmother created to make that doily kind of snowflake pattern in the cyanotype. I also experimented with tissue paper rubbings with crayons on the doilies with my grandma as I was figuring out how I wanted to do this. And then other memories found their way into this piece, like adding watercolor to make these marigolds that because my mom planted marigolds. So making art is a way that we can, keep memories that are important to us fresh and we can guard them. In these few squares that I shared with you from the winter solstice quilt, I wanted them to express ideas that we can be guardians of, like hope and memories, but also of, parts of our world like hummingbirds and butterflies and trees and flowers that are such a critical part of the biodiversity of our planet. Thank you so much for joining me today so that I could share these guardians with you and just share a bit about how I make my nature art. And a huge, huge thank you to Judy and Jim at Nashville North Studios for the chance to be able to have this show and be a part of it. It means an enormous amount to me to have had this opportunity.